Welcome to our first Walk in My Shoes of 2023, where we are bringing to life the theme of our recent magazine, The Lifecycle of a Private Client. My name is Zofia, and I'm the moderator of this series for Philanthropy Impact members. Originally created as a response to the lockdown of 2020, this series fast became a staple part of our membership offering. The recordings are available online as a resource for professional advisors, for your clients, and also those wanting to create positive impact from across the wealth spectrum. Running just once a month now, rather than weekly as it used to be, we will ensure the topics are relevant, informative, and solution-focused for your clients. Following each session, we will curate content from the discussions covered, including further events and articles. As you know, this is a short 30-minute session, so if you are watching live, we encourage you to participate in the chat and also give your thoughts, but also questions. I'm here in the background if you have any issues or would like to know more about what we offer through membership or training. My email will also be available at the end of the video for those watching the recording. And now all that's left for me to do is introduce our panelists for today. We're joined by some of our members and authors from our recent magazine, and it's with great pleasure that I introduce our chair for this discussion, Darren Kelland. He's the Global Head of Private Client Services at Portsford. Joining Darren, we welcome Rebecca Cretney, who's the Investment Counsellor at Nedbank Private Wealth, Mark Greer, Managing Director of Philanthropy Services at Charities Aid Foundation, and Catherine Maid, who's partner at Burges Salmon. Thank you all for joining today, and I will now hand over to Darren to make us start. Thanks, Darren.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you for the introduction. So, as Sophia said, I'm the Head of Private Client Services at Hawksford, and I'm delighted to be joined by my three panelists, Rebecca, Mark, and Catherine, today to explore in a bit more detail the life cycle of a private client. Previously, each of the panelists have contributed to the Philanthropy Impact magazine with articles on the life cycle of a private client. And I think for that reason, it would be useful to start the ball rolling in relation to the role that we as professional advisors have to play in the support of clients in their philanthropic journeys. So as you may have already read in Catherine's article, she talks about the fact that the first port of call for a client who needs philanthropic advice is normally a lawyer. So I'm going to turn to Catherine and say, can you expand upon that a little bit and explain how you develop the role in terms of the advice that you give to clients who need philanthropic advice?
Sure, of course. So clients that come to me for philanthropy advice, it's often triggered by a liquidity event. So they've sometimes sold a business, hopefully for lots of money, or they've inherited a lot of wealth. So they've essentially got more money than they potentially ever need for themselves and their family. So they start looking to what else to do with that and to potentially giving back. So that's usually where I get involved. And there's a number of services that I can provide, and there's a number of services that I personally won't provide, but I will certainly hold their hands and make the right introductions, because I think, as Philanthropy Impact have highlighted before, philanthropy advice is such a multidisciplinary area that no one person is going to be able to provide absolutely all of the advice. I'll usually start with some families come to me and they have a really clear idea on what their values are and where they want to make a difference, and that's great. If they don't, if they're a bit unsure, and that's more people tend to feel a bit overwhelmed about where to start and what to do. I try and break it down into sort of manageable bite-sized portions, and the first thing is really sitting down with them and working out what their values are and where they want to make a difference and an impact, because if you do that, it's going to make their philanthropy far more rewarding, and they're going to stick with it, because it just, it's something that's very personal to them and their family. Then as lawyers, once you've sort of done the value bit, and some lawyers shy away from that and feel a bit reluctant about doing that, but it is a really important step. You can get onto the more kind of traditionally boring legal bits, which will do with making sure that their giving is tax efficient and that they choose the right legal entity through which to sort of conduct their philanthropy. And that's all quite easy and comfortable for lawyers. And that's the sort of the structuring part. And then implementation is making sure that that's when we start to really partner with other advisors. So for example, we bring in investment advisors, obviously for lots of philanthropy philanthropists, it makes complete sense to look at ESG or impact type investing. That's something that I've got a good working knowledge of, but I certainly wouldn't advise on it. So I'd bring in the right partners for them to speak to about that. And also due diligence on beneficiaries is something that I wouldn't do, but we've got a number of great partners that we work with who will sort of make sure that they select the right beneficiaries to work with. And then, we can also give advice as we go along. So governance is often a big issue for family foundations. So we make sure that they're structured and set up in the right way so that there's limited possibility of conflicts of interests, which the Charity Commission are really tight on. And we're there to really hold hands whenever advice is needed as we go along. But I suppose a lot of our work is done at the initial stage when they're looking at strategy and setting up the foundation.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose when we then turn to other experts to bring into the discussion with clients, it would be quite natural to turn to an organisation such as the Charities Aid Foundation. And I'd like to explore with Mark what happens next then in terms of a client who has been advised to speak to you, and they have the initial conversation. How do you take things to the next stage in ensuring that the client is adequately advised throughout their journey?
Thanks, Darren. Yeah, it's really a really enjoyable part of the process we find is when the client first comes to us, very often they have been recommended by one of their professional advisors. Often it's a lawyer, but quite often it's a tax accountant. Sometimes it would be a wealth manager as well. So the conversation has already started about philanthropy, and clearly they have made a decision that they want to, at the very least, explore philanthropic giving. But very often the client, whilst they may be highly experienced in their area of business, they may be very successful in that area, they will often feel really quite uncomfortable in the world of charity and in the world of philanthropy, because they will think, I don't know what good looks like there. I don't know what a well-run charity looks like. I don't know how to assess, is this charity actually achieving what it says it achieves? Can it achieve what they're saying to me that they'll achieve when they're asking me for a donation? And so they feel out of their comfort zone. And that's where we will very often seek to step in. So our advisors are focused more on the impact strategy. And so we work really carefully with the other professional advisors in the client's life, because we are constituted as a charity and we're registered for various financial crime type regulations, and of course regulated by the Charity Commission as well. But we can't give tax advice, we can't give legal advice, and we can't give investment advice either. And clearly being out of the shackles of that is a great place to be. It gives some hindrances as well, of course, but what that means is that we have to really work closely with the community of advisors that are around the clients. So working with their lawyers when there are legal matters involved, working with their tax accountants when tax planning might be coming up. Right now, right ahead of the self-assessment tax deadline on the 31st of January, there's a lot of conversations with those sorts of advisors, and of course the investment strategy as well. And so that means that we work alongside all the different advisors in the client's life, and our focus is usually on often what is the right sort of a structure to sit your philanthropic capital within, but also what is the strategy for your giving. And then when they come to be making donations out to charities in the UK or around the world, we're doing the due diligence that the trustees of a charity always have to do. And in the case of a donor advised fund, we're doing that instead of the donor having to do it and having their own trustees. So we're doing the work to stay within HMRC and Charity Commission rules on foreign grant making, on ensuring that the right reporting has come back from the charities, as well as, of course, the more impact focused work. So we're doing that compliance angle and the impact advisory angle as well.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that. Very useful. So I think it's clear to see that not one advisor can cover all of the angles when it comes to philanthropy. And indeed, this is a multifaceted area. And what is clearly becoming very important to our clients is how they invest their money. So it's not just about giving money away, but investing money becomes very important to them as well. And I'm just about to introduce Rebecca, who, as I say, was an author of an article, as we all were, for Philanthropy Impact magazine. And at the start of Rebecca's article, there was a deeply philosophical question where her and her stepdaughter were on holiday in Crete. And the question was raised, well, what's it all for? And Rebecca, I'm quite interested in listening to how you answered that question, and indeed your thoughts on how you can advise clients who wish to make an impact with their investing, either through impact investing itself or through the lens of ESG.
Mm-hmm. It's a key question that at some point in our lives we all ask ourselves, you know, what's the purpose of life, essentially, and quite often we are far too busy in our lives to really take stock and think. There's an author that I really quite like called Chris Lewis, and he wrote a book called Too Fast to Think. And he talks about how we have constructed this a society in which we are constantly surrounded by social media. We are constantly bombarded with information. It's a go, go, go society in which we really don't stop and think. And although Catherine, Mark, and myself, and also you, Darren, we have very different roles, one thing that potentially can unite all of our roles is that as advisors, we can create that safe space for clients to really stop and actually think, what is it for? As Catherine said, I mean, she and I come from different points in the client advice, and as she quite rightly pointed out, lawyers are normally the first point of call for philanthropic services. But we are quite often, as investment advisors, wealth managers, clients would often speak to us about their wealth planning requirements. And so I think that we have, as advisors, an obligation to ask clients about purpose and to really create potentially a sense of purpose for their wealth, that we can create a framework for them, and we can give them an avenue really to explore aspects that Catherine has touched on, such as values, such as what they want to achieve, what their legacy plans are. And so yeah, that was, I think for me, the point is actually in my professional career, having the liberty to be able to ask extremely wealthy people those questions, and perhaps myself creating an impact as a result of that.
And I suppose a natural lead on from that particular question, Rebecca, is around how you advise clients in difficult times, such as we have at the moment with high inflation and stressful economic times. And indeed, that was the premise in which we all got together to explore that. So does high inflation and cost of living crisis and the economic times that we live in have an impact on the advice that you give?
It does indeed, because human tendency is such that we tend to want to protect ourselves first, and so if we felt that because I'm going to invest sustainably, for example, or if I'm thinking of giving money to philanthropy, we might then decide to cut back on that, because perhaps I'm foregoing an investment opportunity if I invest sustainably, or perhaps now is not the best time to give to causes that are deep, close to my heart, because if I do so, what's inflation going to do to my wealth, and is it going to destroy my wealth? And so our job can be really to show how, through an investment strategy that invests sustainably, you can, if that is the case, you can achieve your goals whilst at the same time being true to your values.
Sorry, I'm going to fix the lights in my room.
Yes, don't worry. Don't worry.
We're very sustainable at Hawksford, and the lights go out after 30 minutes. So taking that further then, Mark, you know, in your article, you talk about transition to net zero and the impact of younger generation. And I'm quite keen to explore the trends that you're seeing in philanthropic giving and in impact investing in particular. And does the current economic climate have an impact on those trends in what you're seeing?
Yeah, there's an enormous amount going on at the moment, both in terms of change that was happening anyway, but undoubtedly changing attitudes that have happened over the last 12 months or so, as we've seen a real change in the economic climate and inflation in particular. In terms of the trends that we see, you know, and whilst I don't like making generalizations about particular generations or people based on their age or their gender, you know, here are some general trends, with the caveat that, of course, there are always exceptions to these rules. But undoubtedly, there are a younger generation of donors who are particularly interested in environmental causes, and there's definitely been a real surge in interest in our clients giving to charities that are focused on environmental matters, both dealing with, you know, very specific ecological issues in particular parts of the world, but then also the wider issues of climate change and the effect that human activity is having on the climate. There's definitely a change there. Something else that we saw was, in many ways, the pandemic drove a resurgence in interest in local and place-based philanthropy as people became more, you know, refamiliarized themselves with their local communities and the places in which they live. There was undoubtedly a bit of a shift away from national or international giving towards more local focus. Not that, you know, everyone pulled out of supporting international development, but undoubtedly people wanted to start finding more community-based causes within the neighborhoods in which they live. I think the other big trend that we've seen in terms of people's attitude towards impact is that we manage the money that has been donated into a donor advised fund and before it's granted out to a charity. And, you know, were we having this conversation 10, 15 years ago, it would have been very widespread to say, well, you know, invest that money for as much impact as you can possibly get. It's charitable money, but, you know, invest it for the highest returns, which means you've got more money to give away, and don't think too much about what it's invested in. Both the younger generation, but actually this is pretty widespread across the age spectrum now. That's really just an increasingly rare perspective on how you should go about your giving. Almost all of our clients want to say, look, we want the money that we've set aside for charity to have, as an absolute minimum, you know, a neutral impact on the environment, but ideally we want it to be having a positive impact on the environment as a minimum. And then, you know, we want those in terms of the investment of the capital that is there, as well as the impacts of the donations that are going out. The final thought in terms of the economic environment and your question there, Darren, picking up on what you were just saying, Rebecca, we've definitely seen some clients who make an annual contribution into their donor advised fund, and because of what markets did last year, feel like they have a lot less money to give away than they would have otherwise. Some have given cash instead of when they usually would have given shares, because those shares are not sitting on such highly appreciated values as they were, and so they've replaced it with cash. Others have pulled back a bit and overall given a little bit less. So we will see what happens in the long run. Generally speaking, activity levels are good and are growing, but client by client, there are some people who undoubtedly feel like they have less money to give away than they did previously.
Okay, thank you. And it's useful, Mark, that you touched on some of the motivations for our clients when they speak to you. And I want to turn back to Catherine and ask about those initial conversations that she has with wealthy clients who want to explore what can be done philanthropically. What are the motivations that you see, Catherine? And do you, and this happens quite regularly in my area, we have clients who come along and say, well, I don't know what I should be doing, but I want to do something, and can you give me some guidance on that? Is that sort of example that I've given, is this something that you see?
Yeah, I think that, again, there's a huge range, because people are also individuals. So I think a common theme is wanting to give something back. I think that's one of the most common themes, because people who tend to have, they've done very well themselves, or they've inherited a lot of money, and they feel quite fortunate, and they want to do something, to give something back and make a difference. I think that's probably the most common theme. I think you're right that sometimes clients come to me and say, I want to do something. I don't know what exactly, or how much should I give? Can you give me an idea of what percentage should I give away? And that's always a really tricky question, because, it's, what are other people doing? And I can, you can give them some guidance, but it varies so massively. And the short answer is give as much away as you comfortably can, making sure that your and your family needs are looked after, and give yourself a bit of a buffer just in case something goes wrong. But it varies massively from clients, and perhaps also maybe a more recent, it's come up once or twice, is reputation. So I think sometimes people, they might not be naturally philanthropic, but for a variety of reasons, they think it would be a good thing for them and their family to be seen to sort of, be doing something. I have to be honest, that's much rarer for me. More clients want to be confidential about it, and they don't want their name out there. But I have had a couple of clients who, for various reasons, see it sort of as a form of a slight restitution. So a whole variety of reasons, but I think the most common is wanting to give something back and do something positive, which, to my mind, is the best reason, really. It's wanting to make a positive difference.
Okay. So the whole drive of this publication from Philanthropy Impact is around the life cycle of a private client. And in the last seminar, I had a hypothesis where I said that philanthropic giving tends to come later on in the life cycle of a private client, in that they've made a significant amount of wealth. They've provided for their families. They've ensured that the financial goals of their families have been met, and the financial security of their family has been well looked after. And it's once all those things are in place that it is more likely to have a conversation with clients around philanthropic goals. However, ESG and impact investing, and particularly ESG, tends to come much earlier, in my opinion, in the life cycle of a private client. And I'm interested in exploring whether that is the experience of the panelists as well. And I think probably I'll turn to Rebecca and say, given that you're a resident investment expert, whether it is true to say that ESG investing comes much earlier in the life cycle of a private client than pure philanthropic giving, or indeed impact investing.
Absolutely, yes, I would say it does. For the reasons that you've outlined already, and also turning back to that question of purpose, we tend to think, what was it all about when we're nearing the end of our lives, as opposed to thinking about it at the beginning of our lives, which is what we really should be doing, is thinking about it at the beginning of our lives, so that when we can then fulfill that purpose before it's too late. But yes, the younger generation, I tend to view impact investing, sustainable investing, as hygiene factors. They simply, and I think it's admirable. I'm going to put my stake in the ground, whatever the English. Sorry, my first language is Spanish, so sometimes I get a bit confused with English. But so for me, I think that is. I think it's absolutely right. Why are we going to, why would anyone invest for their financial future whilst at the same time undermining it? It makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. So millennials, Generation Z, would just simply not countenance investing in certain areas, or if a company was abusing human rights, they would think, well, why on earth should I? And actually, they've got a point, because not only does sustainable investing provide the same level of returns as their non-sustainable or non-ethical, whatever title you want to use, counterparts, but it also does so with less risk, because you can mitigate against things such as reputational risk or the risk of stranded assets. So yes, it does come earlier in the cycle of a private client for those younger generations. They are thinking about that when perhaps older generations aren't. And as well, they don't have such a disjointed idea as older generations. Older generations might sometimes see or have a tendency of viewing investing in a different silo as philanthropic giving, and so there's more of a compartmentalization in that regard, whereas younger generations just tend to view things as more uniform, but that is changing, I think.
So just taking that description of uniformity a little bit further, slightly controversial question that I'm going to pose to Mark, and that is, are younger donors just focused on the environment, or do they focus on a range of issues?
Yeah, so I think environment is high up the list. Human rights are really high up the list as well, though. So we have a lot of younger donors who are focused on anti-human trafficking, on empowerment of women and girls in the developing world and in the developed world as well, in LGBT and other equality causes. So I think environment, human rights are really high on the list for younger donors, and I think that's a byproduct of the world in which they've grown up in, both in terms of what they've been taught about the environment at school, but also the kind of the cultural shifts that have happened whilst many of us have been in our adult lives. We're kind of just there for those generations right from when they were much younger. So those are the big trends we see with younger donors.
Okay, and just following on from that, Mark, one of the questions that has come up when there was reference to it in your article is the role of innovation as regards younger donors. Can you explain in a little bit more detail whether innovation does have an impact on younger donors, and is that a generational issue?
I would say certainly it does. Less of a generational issue. I think, though, it's more of a philanthropy issue. And we would say to our clients, philanthropic capital is the ultimate risk capital. You're not getting it back from a financial risk point of view. So you may want it to achieve all sorts of things, but the one thing you can't ever do with it is get it back in your own pocket. You've given it away. It's crossed the charitable threshold. So be experimental with it, be innovative with it, and take big risks with your philanthropy, and we'll help people to track the effectiveness of that and to see what the learnings are coming back. And so we really encourage clients to be innovative with their giving.
Hi, Darren. I think I'm back now.
Hello, John.
Hi. Is it okay if I take over?
Of course.
Okay, thank you. That was brilliant. Thank you very much. It's very clear from this discussion that advisors from different professions really have to work together to meet client needs. So thank you for emphasizing that. And in our research, we've indicated that there's 23 distinct services that are needed on a donor journey. It's also important to keep in mind the role that advisors can play around encouraging more impact in giving. Investing, sorry. So that's great. Okay, final words of wisdom. So 30 seconds, just add your final words of wisdom, and I'll start with Mark.
I would say talking about philanthropy and talking about impact just gives you a really great opportunity to get to know clients better, to talk about their families, to talk about what drives them, to talk about things that have happened in their lives that have have motivated them to get into giving. So really just use it as an opportunity to deepen those relationships with clients and to broaden out the conversation that you're having with a client.
Okay, terrific. Catherine.
I suppose similar lines, really. I think, you know, don't be scared about talking to clients about their values, and make sure that the planning is really done up front. And I think, as Mark said, the lovely thing about advising in this area is that provided you get it right, which hopefully you do, it's a feel-good area, and it tends to really cement those relationships, and it's very intergenerational. So you do get to know the children, and if you do a good job, then you'll end up hopefully advising the children as well. And yeah, it's a great area to advise in, and I love it. So
I find it really intriguing how important it is to talk to clients about their values, and how shy some advisors are about doing so.
oh, yeah, lots of, especially lawyers, they hate it.
Oh, okay, well, we run specialized training around that kind of thing, so very happy to talk to anyone around that. Rebecca, en français.
Yes, and I can endorse the training that you run, John. So I think from my perspective, we can, as advisors, we have a choice. We can show up and we can do a good job and use our technical, legal, investment expertise, and we can do a really good job without investing our own passion into it. Or we can really view that this generational change and that this point in history offers us an opportunity to do something different. When slavery was abolished in the United Kingdom, Wilberforce partnered up with a poet, Hannah More, and they both tackled the issues of their day head on. We have similar issues that are ongoing with climate change, with social inequality, and they're issues that we in our profession can actually bring to light, and we can ask people about their purpose. And perhaps sometimes the answer will come back, well, I really don't know. And we will feel a bit deflated, but just simply the power of posing a question and having it out there will make people think about these issues more. And the more voices that are asking these questions, the louder the roar, basically. So that would be my final thought.
Great, Rebecca, that's fantastic. Darren, the final word to you.
Very difficult to follow on from Rebecca, given the power of the words that she's just used. But what I would say, and it echoes many of the thoughts that she has expressed, our world is evolving and our client needs are evolving, and we as advisors need to evolve at the same time. And I know, John, it's a bit of a plug for your business, but we have benefited hugely from partnering up with Philanthropy Impact, not just in terms of the exposure of the services that we can offer, but the training that you provided to members of my team so that they can at least begin the conversations with clients. What is your wealth for, and how can we help you achieve that? So I think we need to evolve as client advisors, and we need to seek the input of those around us in the industry who know better than us how to advise clients in this particular area. Those are my words of advice.
Darren, thank you very much for the plug. Just keep in mind that we did not pay you for that, or Rebecca, so thank you very much for that. Zofia, final word for you.
Thanks, John. Thanks, guys. That was brilliant. It was really, really good. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say guy. There is a question in Q&A. Oh, well, it's not a question, it's a comment, but it's coming from the side of Charities, which a perspective from Charities. It's from Jess Maybanks, who's a philanthropy advisor within a charity, and she's saying that it's reflective of the living crisis. The donations are coming down a little bit because people don't want to be showing. So I mean, it's really interesting to talk about that and think about how as advisors you can really help donors understand that they have the wealth and they're going to be fine if they give away, and all the different ways they can do it. So it's great, thank you very much. Right, on to plugging events. We've got 2 face-to-face events coming up in the next 2 months, one both in London, I'm afraid, but both are looking at some great conversations. The first one is at BDB Pitman's on the 18th of January. Does wealth advice require a radical rethink? Which I think is a great follow-on from this conversation. And Thursday the 9th of February, we're at Brown Advisory, and we're looking at meeting changing client expectations, future-proofing your firm to the values-based approach across